Ever wonder what life as an emergency backup goalie is like? We find out today on Locked On Wild.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any of our new episodes throughout the week. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, Connor Beaupre joins us as we talk about what it's like to be an emergency backup goalie, share some stories, look at the everyday routine, and we'll talk a little Filip Gustavsson as well. My name is Seth Topal, your daily Minnesota Wild insider, and as mentioned, we have called in the EBUG for today's episode. Connor Beaupre joins us. Connor, thanks for joining the show today, and I'm so excited to get into what goes into being an EBUG, because we see some of these stories throughout the NHL from time to time about guys getting in and having an opportunity to go out on the ice in obviously the worst of circumstances. And so I'm just fascinated by how this all works.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I actually do listen to your pod. Just want to throw that out there right away on a pretty regular basis. You almost put them out more often than I can listen to them. So happy to be on. You know, it's always funny being on podcasts that you listen to on a regular basis. But yeah, a lot of stuff goes into it. You know, we'll get into, I'm sure, a few stories here. But the best thing you can know, and all the other EBUGs that I know say this too, is when it comes to the rules for EBUGs, there are no rules. It seems to change all the time, as we saw like with Toronto this year, all that stuff. So it's always something new, but that's part of the fun of it too. So
yeah, for sure. It's one of those where you find your own way to do it, I would imagine. And let's just start with your journey to get to this point. How did you get connected with the Wild, and what led to this as an opportunity? I know you had tons of goalie experience throughout your life, collegiate career. How'd you end up getting connected with the Wild?
So it was back in, was it 2016 was that Stadium Series game? So it was 16-17 season, and I was playing club at University of Minnesota at the time. But my dad was going to play in the alumni game against the Blackhawks, the North Stars Blackhawks game. And so they were doing some practice skates before they had that. So like Walls and Darby and those guys were all skating and getting ready for the game. But Gilles Meloche was the other goalie. So he was the goalie coach in Pittsburgh at the time. And we'll probably loop back on that later. But so Gilles was my dad's goalie partner in the 80s when they made the cup run 80-81. But Gilles was going to play in the game but wasn't around, so they needed another goalie to fill in these coaches' skates to, you know, be part of the group that was out there, because a lot of the guys were already here. So I would go in and fill, and it would be like, you know, like I said, Darby and Walls, and I'm trying to think of what other guys from that group were still around. I mean, even some of the North Stars guys were still around too, but did that for a few times, and that game wasn't until like February, I think. But they were skating kind of back in December and kind of November-ish time, you know, just to get the legs going, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so at the time that was the first year they had like officially that you had to have an emergency backup goalie. And if you look back on kind of some of the history of it, there's been instances where it's happened like earlier than that, but not officially. Like they've just had anybody go run home and grab their gear and stuff like that. But after the whole Florida fiasco where they almost put in Rob Tallis, the goalie coach at the time for Florida, and then Luongo ended up coming back in the game. They're like, all right, maybe we should probably figure out like some sort of system for this just in case, so we don't have to put like a 60-year-old goalie coach in. So that was the first year it was mandated. And at the time, Tino Vasquez was the name of the guy who was doing it before me. And he had been doing it, I think, a little bit more like on call, like unofficially. But I think he was sick or something one of the days in December, and they needed a guy. And Bob Mason, the former goalie coach, gave me a call and was saying, hey, do you have any availability to come back up the game night? It was like a text message. I was like, hey, can you come back up the Wild game for us tonight? Like, our emergency goalie can't make it. And I was so confused. I was like, I don't know if this is a real text or like something like that, because it was kind of a new concept. So it wasn't one of those things like, oh, I wish I could do this kind of a thing. But yeah, I got the text and texted him back and said, yeah, sure, why not? And I guess Walls or Darby or somebody like that had said, oh yeah, I think Connor would probably be able to do it. He's skating with us, a couple days ago. So that's basically how it started. And then ended up splitting time with Tino from there. And he was like, great, I don't have to do 41 games. And him and I split it for 3 years. And then the lockout happened. And then he was going to move down to Florida. And so he was done. So I ended up just taking it on by myself, which 41 games isn't the worst thing once you get into the rhythm of it. But, there's some days where they've got like, 6 games and like 8 nights or something like that, or 9 nights. And you're just like every other night you're going back to the rink and you're like, I should just sleep here. Like, you're just there for 4 or 5 hours. And then, you mix in some practices a lot of those days too. And it's like, I don't leave St. Paul. Like, I live in Minneapolis. I just get stuck in St. Paul for like 2 weeks.
So that goes perfectly into my next question, and you kind of alluded to it as well, is how do you stay ready? Like, what's the daily routine of just trying to keep yourself loose in the event that you get that call, which, as I mentioned earlier, is always unexpected?
Yeah, it's so hard to prepare to do nothing a lot of times. After a while, it kind of, the feeling kind of goes away. Like, oh, you're nervous when you go. It's like, I've been going for 6 seasons now. Like, I've probably done 150 some games, maybe more than that, maybe almost close to 200. And you kind of get to the point where like, all right, I'm relaxed, I'm ready. You understand, hey, the pressure's not going to be on you, to do well. The only pressure that I'm going to get from that is from myself to want to perform and be good. Like, nobody's going to expect somebody to walk out of the press box and come right in. But, on a daily basis, it's not so stressful. But I think, playing a lot, so I play regularly in some men's leagues and stuff like that. Plus, I think I get lucky. I get a lot of practice time too, compared to other emergency goalies that do it around the league. So it just kind of keeps you a little bit more confident that, hey, when I do go out there, yeah, they score a lot, obviously, but it's like, you feel confident that if you had a guy one-on-one, you still have a chance to make a save. So
for sure. We'll continue the chat with Connor Beaupre as we talk EBUG on today's episode of Lockdown Wilds after this. There is no I in team, but there is one in Indeed, and that's the hiring platform you need to build yours. When you're hiring, you need Indeed. Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. Instead of spending hours on multiple job sites searching for candidates with the right skills, Indeed is a powerful hiring platform that can help you do it all. With Instant Match, over 80% of employers get quality candidates whose resume on Indeed matches their job description the moment they sponsor a job, according to Indeed Data US. Start now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/lockedon. Offer good for a limited time. Claim your $75 credit now at Indeed.com/lockedon. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Continuing today's episode of Locked On Wild, once again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. For the everydayers, we will continue to recap the offseason here this week. We're going to start to look at how some of the recent Stanley Cup champions, how they did it, how they got to the top of the mountain. So that will be on the docket for future episodes here this week. But we continue to talk life for an EBUG on today's episode of Locked On Wild with Connor Beaupre. Connor, do you have a daily routine at this point for, getting to the rink? Are you a superstitious guy? Do you have like a set routine, or is it more so just kind of go with the flow that day?
it was, I was thinking about this actually before I hopped on here, because that's usually a question you get, like, oh, are you, goalie superstitious, all that stuff. I feel like a lot of it stems more from just you do something so many times during the season. For players, it's 82 times. For me, it's 41 home games. But in that sense too, it's hard not to kind of do the same things, because you get to where you need to be on time, you do your job, and you go home. Like, you make sure everything that goes right, so that if something else gets goofy, you get called in, you got to do something, you're prepared, you're in the right place, you're ready to go. So I would almost say it's like less superstitious than it is just being consistent, which is what being a goalie is all about too. And now that I look at that in that perspective, you look at a lot of goalies who, they do the same thing all the time, and people attribute it to superstition. It's really just trying to be as prepared as you were last game when you played well.
Yeah.
And so it's less about like kind of the luck factor, and then I did the right things to get to that point. But for me, I usually try and get to the rink a little bit before 6. So warm-ups are usually at like 6:25, 6:30 for a 7:00 game. And that gets me there like just in time when guys are playing soccer, basketball beforehand. And that would be plenty of time for me if they say, hey, which has happened before, the snowstorm game against Ottawa a couple years ago. I think like Devin Dubnyk got caught in the snowstorm. Dumba and those guys I think that was that car crash in quotations, where they bumped into each other, him and Brodeen, I think, or something like that. And so if guys can't make it to the rink, they're late or they're like sick last minute, I'm there in time where I can just go right to the locker and put my stuff on and be out there for warm-ups if I need to be. So I usually try and be there right around that time. But when I come in, it's funny. I talk to the same people as I go through the routine. So, walk in, talk with the guys at the metal detector entrance from the ramp, walk over, talk to another security guard that kind of right over by the locker room before you go upstairs. I go up, there's on the club level, I don't know if a lot of people know this, there's an NHL alumni lounge back in the corner where a lot of the former Wild North Stars alumni go. And they just have like a little space in there. So Carl Wetzel's the guy that runs that. He used to play way back in the day. Great guy. I always spend 5 minutes, former goalie, spend 5 minutes talking to him a little bit, see what he's up to. And then watch warm-ups kind of from around that area, and then go up to the press box. And it's like, out of 41 games, I probably do that 36, 37 times.
Okay.
So it's pretty consistent.
Yeah, for sure. So let's say you come in, you don't get that initial like, hey, we might need you, but then you're up watching, and all of a sudden you get the text, I would imagine, that says, hey, Dubnyk or somebody got a little banged up, and we don't know if they're going to be able to finish the game. How does the getting ready in the bullpen, how does that all work?
So it actually happened to me twice this year, but for the visiting teams. So we had, who were we playing in the first one? We had Tampa Bay. So this was kind of an interesting one. When Tampa Bay was in town, Vasilevsky was supposed to start, and there was like a big, not like a blow up, but like people in the press box were so confused because they announced that Elliott was going to start like right at the last minute. He came out in warmups first, and I was looking like, and everybody was so confused. I remember I was talking to Jesse Pierce about it, and she's like, I don't know what's going on. I thought Vasilevsky was supposed to start. He's not. And we look out there in warmups, and Vasilevsky is like straight legged, looking down, and just like skated across the red line like 3 times and got off the ice. Like, I don't think he took a single puck in warmups. And so as I'm kind of watching, Chris O'Hearn, the assistant GM, who I basically report to, he kind of tells me where I need to be most of the time. He comes and taps me on the shoulder and goes, "Oh, you're on call." And I go, "Yep, I'm here every night." Like, what do you mean? He goes, "No, you need to go suit up. Vasilevsky is sick during the game, or, during warmups, or when he got to the rink, and you got to go downstairs and get dressed." So I go, "Okay." So you head down, grab your bag so I park in the player ramp underneath. So then my bag's basically right there when I need to go down there.
Sure.
Grab that and went in the locker room and met with John Cooper. And Coop was like, "So here's the deal. Vasilevsky can't go. He had to take his gear off. He was supposed to start. Isn't doing it. Elliott's going to go in. You're going to put your stuff on, be ready to go right in here. And if we need you, we'll come back and grab you." And I was like, "All right, sounds good." And this isn't the first time. This is the 3rd or 4th time I've done it, I think. But this is probably one of the most interesting situations. So I'm in the visitors' locker room is like all the way down. If you were like walking down past where the Wild get dressed to the right, whatever. And there's one more in between where they keep a lot of like the equipment, trainer stuff, like all that stuff going on. So I got ready in there, had my stuff on. There's a little TV in there. They got a chair, like jersey all ready to go. And I basically sat and watched the game. 60 minutes, just on this chair in this other locker room, like right across from theirs. And basically just was like, all right, if Elliott gets hurt, one of the older goalies in the league, he wasn't supposed to start tonight. Like, felt like highest chances that there could be to go in.
Yeah.
And so, I guess I wouldn't say that was like the most nervous I've been, but like the most real it had been for a chance to go in. So, in between periods, they're coming back out, standing in the hallway, in the locker room, listening to what's going on. Cause it's like, all right, now I'm part of the Lightning at this point. so in there, it was pretty cool. Good group, trainers were great. And yeah, it didn't end up having to go in, but the Wild stomped him that night. And there was a funny line. Coop was on the bench and was screaming, you guys better pick it up on defense because we can't take this. We can't take Elliott out. We can't take Moose out. So you better pick it up for him at this point. So it was pretty funny. I mean, I don't think Tampa played a great game that night, but
yeah,
Elliott played pretty well. He battled pretty hard in there. He was getting hung out to dry. So
yeah, I remember that one, and was watching the game at home and just remember seeing the storm on Twitter of people that are like, where's Vasilevsky? What's going on here? So I can only imagine what it was like up in the box, just seeing this all unfold. But is that your most memorable EBUG story, or do you have one or two others that led to similar circumstances like that?
So the first time was, I think it was in like my first year doing it while we're playing Calgary, and Dubnyk got hurt in the first period and left after the second, or didn't come back in the second, and Stalock went in. So I dressed for that one. I was sitting in the hallway just outside the locker room at that. Well, so they've got the trainer, so the main locker room and then the trainer's room's right off of that. Got ready in there, which is basically in the locker room. And then, but there were no TVs in there to watch the game. So I went around. So I watched the second period in the hallway with Kevin Gorg on his monitor out there. Just, I don't know why I ended up out there. And then the third period I watched there's like a little players lounge inside the locker room area. So I watched in there, and like, I think like Mikko was hurt. Spurgeon was hurt. There was a couple guys that were out, and I was like sitting with those guys watching the game in the locker room as it went on. And that was the first time. And I remember somebody after that, they ended up losing in the shootout on that Gaudreau goal where it looked like he went backwards and he chipped it over Stalock and scored. But the next day somebody was like, did you realize that realistically, if Stalock would have got hurt, like on the second shot, you would have had to just go in for one shootout shot with Johnny Gaudreau to decide the game. Like, that's how goofy this is. Like, it could be, the end of the season, or it could even be in the playoffs if the situation is right, where you just got to go in for basically one shot, and that's going to determine who's going to win the game. So there was that time, and then there's a couple times. It's funny. I always look at the lineups that come into town, and there's some goalies that just seem to get hurt more than others. And James Reimer is one of those guys. And I remember thinking that, they were playing the Sharks, and I think it was like 3 years ago or something. And I was like, all right, it's Reimer, like jokingly, like, all right, he's a little fragile, whatever. And of course, like right in the first period, he got dinged up and left the game. And so I went down and brought my gear down and was just kind of waiting. And they were like, all right, he might be okay to come back. And I was like, well, what do you want me to do? Like, just be right here. I'll just put like some of your stuff on. And so that was another time. But this year, like 2 weeks after the Tampa thing, Vegas came to town, and it was when Logan Thompson like tore something in his groin on that one play.
Yeah.
That was a bad one. But I went down and got dressed for that, and I was like, yep, this happened like 2 weeks ago, like pretty normal feeling. And I think it was like just in the third period. But it was their dad's trip as well. So all the Vegas dads came down, and they all had, their beers and stuff like that. They're had a good time because they're up. I think they're up like 3 or 4 goals or something like that. And so I'm sitting in the locker room, and like 3 of the dads come in there, and they're like, "Oh, are you the emergency goalie?" Like, I didn't know if it was a real thing or not, like all this stuff. And then one of the guys was like, "Oh, let me get a picture with you," or whatever. And I was like, "Oh yeah, no problem, whatever." And I'm just kind of like hanging out, and they're like, "All right, might have to go play for you guys, or might not." But it ended up being Aiden Hill's dad.
Oh, sure.
And so Hill went into the game, played last night too, played great last night. But he was in the game at the time, and he was kind of laughing like, "Oh, you're actually backing my son up right now." So It was pretty funny. I don't know if I'll ever see that picture, but I'm sure it's pretty funny. It's all of them, and they're all got their beers, just me like in half my gear, like in the locker room waiting to go in. So
Oh, that's
it was
great.
pretty funny.
So Filip Gustavsson had just a fantastic season this year, and so we're going to talk a little bit about him, and we'll talk about just life in the NHL as well as we finish today's episode of Locked On Wilds after this. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. For the everydayers, again, keep an eye out for our series that we're starting, taking a look at how the last few Stanley Cup champions have gotten to the top of the mountain. We also have we'll have a few extra episodes for you as well this week. I know no Wild in the playoffs, so we're just gonna keep the content flowing here as we finish up today with Connor Beaupre. And Connor, let's just talk a little bit about Filip Gustavsson, kind of an unknown coming into this season, and obviously with the amount of time that you get to spend with the team, just talk a little bit about what you have seen from Gus throughout the season, his growth, and how he got from a relative unknown at the start of the season to a guy who was one of the best statistical goalies in the NHL at the end of the season.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I mean, you look at the trade, a year ago or whenever it went down, you kind of think, wow, we just traded a guy who's a, certified starter. Like, Talbot's played consistent. He plays well for a guy that, I think he had maybe like 15 or 20 games under his belt, maybe tops, young. But the potential was always there. I felt with him, like people thought, okay, he could be good. But I remember he played, I'm pretty sure it was him in that season where he played his first couple of games. He played like they threw him in against Toronto in the first game of the season, and he had like 45 saves, and they upset Toronto right at the Gaten Classic. Like Leafs fans meltdown right away. We lost Ottawa, but he played awesome in that game. And I was like, all right, you see something there, and then you kind of look back in the box scores and you start to wonder, like, all right, is it Ottawa? He's letting 4 or 5 on 25, but they're probably all high danger. But you get a guy like that comes in that, sometimes trying to prove that I can be the guy. And you know what, the pressure is off a little bit with Fleury there, but I think Freddie Chabot worked with him well. And I know he's got a great goalie coach back home as well too. But, I think his game went from, as younger goalies, you always feel like you're trying to catch up, or like, for me, I guess I'm not technically a younger goalie out there anymore, but when you're not used to the pace, you're always trying to catch up, and your game can get a little bit wild, I guess, in a way, with it, for lack of a better term. But you're oversliding into pucks, you're overreaching, you're giving up a few more rebounds than you should because you're just trying to get there. But once you can find yourself at that level and you can calm down, that's when things really change. I mean, Talbot's a good example of that too, where everything just seems to hit him in the chest. It makes it look really easy. And I think for Gus now, he's just getting so square to pucks, and he's beating, passes, he's reading plays so well. He just makes it look so easy. He's calm in the net, and that gives the team a lot of confidence too, I think. So as that kept going, I think he learned to kind of dial in his game and slow things down in a way, and just, hey, let's make all the saves right off the chest. It doesn't have to be flashy. Make your saves and control those rebounds. So it's been cool to watch.
Yeah, and obviously he set himself up for a pretty nice payday here this offseason, and deserves every penny of it. I mean, there were just numerous instances. I think of the game against the New Jersey Devils, where he took a really, really good Devils team and kept them pretty quiet. And then on the road against the Toronto Maple Leafs, same thing up until overtime. And so a young guy that can go into some of the toughest environments to play and just absolutely silence a team, and he is going to get rewarded for all that work here this offseason.
Yeah, I think that's really his mentality is, it doesn't matter who he's playing or, who's out there with a lineup in front of him. I mean, even that Nashville game at the end of the season where they kept a bunch of guys back, doesn't matter to him. I mean, he's going to go out there, play his game, and he makes it look like, yeah, he has a good game. You can tell he's making a lot of saves, but it could be against anybody. It doesn't matter how strong or weak the team is. He makes it look like he just had another easy night in there. So yeah, he's definitely earning every dollar he's got coming. And, I think you got to know that hopefully, Billy G can get something done and get him on a good deal here. But you got to know that whatever he gets, he's probably underpaid. So
Yeah, 100%. Connor, do you have any notable Marc-Andre Fleury stories? Fleury obviously coming in here as one of the most decorated goalies in the history of the league. And I know for Filip Gustavsson, I'm sure just trying to soak up as much knowledge as he can with what you have had, with the chances you've had to be around Fleury in practice. Any stories that have rubbed off?
Well, kind of back to what I was saying about Milosh earlier to connect the circle here. So my dad was goalie partners with Milosh in Minnesota his first year, was a young goalie, 19, 20 years old, with Milosh, who was like 30, 31, who had played, a lot of his career already and was a seasoned veteran at that time. Milosh ended up being Fleury's goalie coach in Pittsburgh for a couple years when he first got in, and Gilles was like a big advocate to get him drafted. Pittsburgh, hey, you got to take this guy, be part of the organization. And so got him in. So as players were kind of coming back for training camp in September-ish, in August, I ended up skating with a lot of guys who were in town already, like Middleton, Kaprizov, Spurgeon, Moose, all those guys are skating. But there are no goalies in town because they had just traded for Gustafson and he was coming back from, Europe. And then Fleury hadn't moved here yet. He was still in Chicago and he's working on that. So for the first couple of weeks, it was just me and those guys, like a group of like 5 or 10. Sammy Walker was there. Henches was there. And a few other scattered guys in and out. And then Fleury ended up showing up. So I got to spend like a week and a half, like every day going out on the ice skating with him. And everybody always say, oh, like, what's it? It's got to be the best. Like, he's got to be the funniest. He legitimately is the funniest, nicest guy. Like, it's like every time you talk to him, it feels like you've known him for years. And like, he remembers so many things. He asks people. I'm like, he's that nice to like everybody, whether it's fans, trainers, other players, call-ups, all that stuff. Like me, like, it just seems like he always remembers those things and like will ask you about it again, stuff like that, which is super cool. Yeah, so I asked him about that, and he was like, oh yeah, that's right. Jilly and I still talk every once in a while and connect. So that was kind of a funny, just connection all the way around through that, and now he's in kind of a similar situation with Gustafson coming in and being a mentor and trying to teach whatever you can. But also, I think Fleury said at one time in every, I'm learning stuff from Gus too. The way he plays is different than the way I play, and you can still pick up stuff like that all the time. So pretty cool stuff, but great guy. Funny guy in the locker room, always, always has a smile, but, does all the right things to take care of himself. I mean, a lot of time you're talking to him, he's stretching or he's doing some sort of part of his, routine. So
the one goalie that could want to fight Jordan Binnington and still be nice about it too. How about that when that nearly unfolded against the Blues with Fleury saying, you know what, let's go.
I wouldn't say Fleury is the only goalie who wants to fight Jordan Binnington, but to just throw it down in a game, sometimes that's the way that the tide turns. And you think about it a lot too, when you're down a guy, whether it's the power or on the penalty kill or the other team's got the goalie pulled or whatever it may be, like, as the goalie, you're the 6th man to match up with their 6th man. So you're supposed to be in there. Mm-hmm. And I think for Fleury, he's looking down there and he's seeing Binnington taking jabs at guys and throwing punches. It's like, that's my guy down there. That's the 6th guy. That's my guy. And at some point you just got to go, that's enough. Like I'm sick of seeing my guy, my counterpart in the other end do that. I got to put a stop to it. So I would love to see it happen. I think Fleury would have gotten him pretty good. Yeah. Binnington's mind was elsewhere. And I think Fleury would have surprised him. So
we got robbed, but we always had the near fight. But Connor, this has been fantastic. Glad to have you on the show. We're definitely going to have to do this again. Yeah. For listeners, make sure to give Connor a follow on Twitter. His handle is on that side of the screen. I'm trying to point at it, but make sure to give him a follow, and we will. There you go. We'll have Connor back on at some point here during the off season to just talk more about being a goalie. For sure. And for listeners, make sure that you subscribe on Locked On Wild so that you don't miss out on any of our new episodes. Whether it's your first listen or whether you listen every single day of the week, make sure you follow on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss out on any of our new episodes. You can find all of our content at Locked On Wild as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.